Well, another episode of True Crime Files of Los Angeles. Inside Story. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, we're going to continue to talk about the criminal justice system. And I think the last 4 podcasts we've talked about sentencing. It's one that a lot of people like to criticize, that the sentences aren't long enough or the sentences are too long. So that's one of the issues that confronts the criminal justice system. We have people out there that are lock them up and throw away the key. And that kind of permeated our criminal justice system back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. That was the emphasis on the victim and what had happened to the victim and trying to make it right for the victim and the victim's family. And then we move on and we have the bleeding heart liberals, I call them, who've come in and their focus is on the defendant, the killer, that society has harmed him or her to be the way they were. So we've got to concentrate on the killer and make it tolerable for them to be incarcerated. So that's what's been going on. But what I want to talk about in this podcast is what are the possible sentences for murder? We have the death penalty. We have life without possibility of parole, and then we have life with parole. The first one is the death penalty, and it does apply in certain states, certain jurisdictions. However, it has its pros and its cons. And there's one thing, as far as debating the death penalty, I'm sure it's true for many of you, and growing up, my mother taught me, don't you ever talk about religion or politics in public. You know, that's a no-no. And then later on in life, my mother said, no, don't ever talk about the death penalty either. Why? Everybody is emotionally charged on any one of those topics. We call them button issues. And I don't want to talk about it in the sense of being in favor of it or opposed to it. I don't care. It's something we have to debate as to whether it exists or not. If it does exist, then it's something we consider. If it doesn't exist, then we have to consider what are the other alternatives. So let me just talk about the death penalty. What are the pros for it? Makes society safer. You have these dangerous people executed, and you don't have to think about them again. Deterrent. The public is deterred from killing people. Then people come in and say, well, wait, if that were true, then why are we continuing to have murders if it's a deterrent? Then you have the retribution group about, is it appropriate? An eye for an eye. If you kill somebody, you can be killed. And then you have people who want to talk about costs. You know, when you execute somebody, it's done. You don't have to maintain that person for another 40, 50 years. But then we have appellate costs, attorneys' fees, and it goes on and on and on. So that one's kind of a wash. It can go both ways. And some who are pro, the emphasis is on the victim. Now, when you get to the con side of it, some people feel very strongly that it's wrong to kill. No one should kill. And government definitely shouldn't be in the business of killing people. And they say it has to be humane, and killing is not humane. And the last thing, the strongest argument I think has been, is, ooh, you could make a mistake. You could execute an innocent person. That would be terrible. And everybody would agree on that. So, you know, if you have somebody in custody and you made a mistake, you can release them. But you can't release somebody from a death sentence when they've been executed. So, yes, there are, two sides to it. And it is a topic that everybody has a feeling one way or the other, and you can't really persuade people to change their opinion. Now, this is some of the points that was made out, and number 10 here is the possibility of rehabilitation of a criminal. Oh, wow. We've already talked about that. Some people can be rehabilitated, and maybe some people can't, but we've got to take a look at it. What we know for certain, especially in California, the popularity of the death penalty is kind of not the same as it was when I first started out prosecuting back in the 60s. It was like 85% of the population believe in the death penalty. The last time we had an election in California, it just barely passed by 50+%. And I would think if you have another on the ballot, it would be very likely that you would not get a majority of the people who were in favor of it. So it may be waning as far as its popularity. So if the death penalty is eliminated, meaning we cannot consider it as a punishment for murder, then what is left? Well, life without the possibility and life with the possibility. So I want to take some specific cases and talk about them. And now they're going to be a little gruesome. I don't mean it from the gruesome standpoint, but you have to understand the type of murderers that do exist. And I want to start with the first one, Bill Bradford. He was known as the death row poet. Back in 1984, he met Sherry Miller. She was working as a bartender at the meat market in Culver City. They got to know each other, talk, and she was saying that she wanted to be a model. And he said, yeah, I'm a photographer. I take pictures all the time of models, car conventions. And she said, hey, would you take pictures of me? I talked to the agency and they said, I have to have a portfolio, a photo portfolio. I said, fine, let's go. I'll take you out to the desert and take some photos of you in different poses, and you can put that in your portfolio. And so they arranged a date, and the two of them drove out in his car to what we call Horseshoe Canyon. It's really at the north end of Los Angeles County, and it's desolate. There's nothing out there, just sagebrush and boulders. And it is photogenic out there, and he took a lot of pictures of Sherry there. And you can see these pictures here of Sherry and some other pictures. And it wasn't too long after taking the picture, he started sexually molesting Sherry. And then he killed her. He strangled her. But then he had to decide what to do with the body. Didn't know what to do with it. So he was afraid that she'd be identified. She had certain tattoos. It's very small tattoos. And he carved them off. He took her body and wrapped it up and took it back to downtown Los Angeles. Well, it was on the west side of Los Angeles. This was on Pico Boulevard, and that's where her body was found. And he was never connected to it. Now, the following day, Bill Bradford noticed a neighbor girl who was young. She was 15 years old, very attractive, and he struck up a conversation with her about photos, her good looks, and she said, yeah, I'd like to have my picture taken. Would you do it? And he said, yeah. And he takes her out to the same desert location, Horseshoe Canyon. Her name is Tracy Campbell, and she's never seen again. But her body was found decomposed up there months later, exactly the same location where those photographs were taken of Sherry Miller. Wow. So he did this a number of times, taking young women up to the desert and their body never found. But he also was involved in a lot of domestic violence, a lot of attacks on women. He brutalized women. So I put this together, not to go into detail, but he tortured and brutalized sexually many, many women. So that was his background. And when he was arrested, he had film in his film bag. And when they developed it, there was many, many women. And we tried to track down how many of them were still alive. We found a few of them, but many of them were missing persons. And most likely they were killed, but we were never able to find the body, never able to prove. What was interesting about Bill Bradford when it was his trial, he testified in the penalty phase. He said he didn't care about the death penalty. And he said to the jury, think of how many you don't even know about. You are so right. That's it. And then he walked off the witness stand. He didn't confess. He didn't know how many people he killed, didn't know the name of many of them. So what should we do? What should the sentence be for Bill Bradford? He killed many women. He brutalized many of them in killing them for sexual reasons. And many of them were young and they were very vulnerable. On the other hand, some of you are going to look at it, well, Bill Bradford could be rehabilitated. He could change his ways. And is society really at risk if he's given life without the possibility of parole? So those are some of the arguments that you would have to consider in what is the appropriate sentence. In his case, he got the death penalty. The jury said it should be a penalty of death. And his case went up on appeal so many times for so many years, like for 30 years. And he was never executed, even though he was on death row all of that time. So it was never carried out in his case. Now, I want to take another case, and it's similar in that it involves Lawrence Bittaker, and his moniker was the Toolbox Killer. What he and his friend would drive along the beach highways looking for teenagers, especially those who were hitchhiking. And how did that all evolve? Well, it started out, his buddy Roy Norris, they were in state prison up at San Luis Obispo, and they kept talking to each other and talking about things that they were going to do once they got out of state prison. And they came up with this sexual fantasy that they would get out there and pick up young women, especially hitchhikers. They would have sex with them in all various ways. And then the more they thought about it, well, we don't want them going to the police. We don't want to go to state prison again. Of course, we have no option but to kill those victims. So that was their plan. They knew what they were going to have to do, and they got started. And they started it by driving the beach community. They started down in Redondo Beach, looking for various girls, and they came across Cindy. Cindy had been at a church group meeting and was walking home from that group. She's 16 years old. She's walking down the sidewalk. She's not hitchhiking or anything, and they decide to pick her up. So Bittaker is driving the van. It's called the Murder Mac. They're going to use that to capture these young girls, rape them, and kill them. And they pull to a stop there, and they wait for her to arrive. And then Norris grabs her, throws her in the back of the van, uses duct tape, tapes her up so she can't get loose. And then they head for the mountains. And they drive up to the Glendora Mountains, and they start raping her and having sex with her. And this went on for some period of time. And Norris says, hey, we're not going to kill you. We're not going to kill you. Just go along with us. And she did. She thought. They promised they weren't going to kill her. And then Norris says, okay, let's let her go up here. And Bittaker says, no, that was our agreement. We can't have her go to the police. We don't want to go back to state prison. And so they agreed. And so Bittaker strangles her, attempts to strangle, and he's not able to strangle her sufficiently. He turns and sees this coat hanger, and he says to Norris, pick that coat hanger up, give it to me. And Norris gives it, and he takes it and puts it around her neck. And with force, they're able to strangle her, and she dies. And then they take her body and throw her over the side of the ravine there, and it goes down the hill. That was the end of Cindy. And just a short time later, this is in July, next month, they're out doing the same thing. They're driving along, looking for young girls, and they find Andrea. Now, she's hitchhiking, and they pick her up, get her in the van. They tie her up. Now I put this map here so you can see the distance that Bittaker drives from the Bay Area all the way up to the Glendora Mountains in San Gabriel Canyon. So they take her up there and they have sex with her back and forth between the two of them. And Bittaker wants some beer. Tells Norris, hey, go down there, get some beer, and then come back. So he's up there continuing to have sex with her. But Bittaker decided, he wanted to do something as a souvenir. He wanted to have something because he always talked a good line in prison, but his buddies always said, you'll never do it. You'll never do it. And he wanted to prove to them that he was raping these girls and sexually molesting them. So he brought this Polaroid camera along, took pictures of Andrea in various sexual positions of him having sex with her. Now he had some evidence he could show his buddies of what he was doing. It wasn't just talk. So when he was finished with her, he had brought along an ice pick. He didn't want to have to strangle her. And he takes the ice pick and sticks it in her ear. And she flinches, moves back, but it doesn't kill her. He takes it and stabs it in the other ear. And it doesn't kill her. So, he's trying to figure out what to do. And he eventually gets on top of her and jumps with her foot and breaks off the ice pick in her head. And eventually had to strangle her, to kill her. Then dumps her body over the side of the mountainside. So time went on, and now it's September. And the two of them are again in their, what we call the murder Mac, driving along the beach there, looking for young girls. And they see these two girls on a bus bench. And they stop and say, hey, why don't you come with us down to the beach? And they said, no. They said, well, we've got some weed here. We can smoke some weed. So the girls get into the car and they take off driving. And when they're not headed in the area of the beach, they get a little suspicious, and one of the girls goes for the door and they grab her and prevent her from escaping, and then they tie them up. They take them up to the Glendora Mountains, all the way up there, and Bittaker is having sex with Jacqueline. And they're sharing her. They're not doing anything with the younger one because they give her some drugs and she kind of passes out. But what Bittaker wants is he's brought a tape recorder along with him, and he starts taping Jacqueline as she's moaning these sexual acts that he's performing on her. And he does this, and he's very pleased with the fact that he has now a tape recording that he can play to his prison buddies. Then he takes an ice pick and he kills Jacqueline with the ice pick. So it works this time, and they kill her, and now they're stuck with this Leah, and they don't know what to do with her. And Bittaker is holding her, and Norris is they're trying to strangle him, but they can't get it. So they get this sledgehammer, and Norris takes this sledgehammer, and that is the sledgehammer they used. They smashed her head in, just killed her, and take both of the bodies and dump them on the side of the mountain there, and they tumble down into the ravine. So they've done this a number of times, they've got away with it, and they're thinking about another approach. And this time they're thinking about using mace, spray. So the next time they see a young woman, and she's closing a garage door, she's pulling it down, and Bittaker comes up and sprays this mace on her, and instead of her missing, she starts screaming, and the neighbors start looking out, and he becomes scared. And Norris drives off, leaves Bittaker there, and then Bittaker has to take off running. The thing that is good about it, the lady survives, and she gives a report to the police that it's a white van. Gives a pretty good description of the van. And the next thing is, again in October 31st, Halloween, they're out looking for somebody, and this time they want it to be different. They're up in the Burbank area. They've left the beach area, it's a little too dangerous because now the beach area has all these missing persons of young women that have disappeared. So they're out driving through Burbank, and they see this young girl, and they come up. She's hitchhiking, and they persuade her to get in, and she does. She jumps into the back of the van, and they don't, she doesn't realize Norris is back there, and then he jumps out and grabs her and restrains her, and they drive away. But this time, they perform all the sexual acts on this mattress in the back of the van, and so they restrain her. But this time, Bittaker wants even more of a tape recording of her screaming. And in order to get her to scream even louder, he takes these vice grips that he has in the back of the van, and he squeezes her nipples and her vagina. And the screaming is so loud on the tape, and he's so pleased with that. So they both get tired of sexually molesting her, and they want to kill her, and they're having problems. So they use a coat hanger, and they wrap it around her neck, and they tighten it with a vice grip. And you're going to say, why are you continuing to dwell on these macabre acts of these people? Well, this is the way the case is solved, is that this coat hanger is around her neck. And when they drop her body off in this area, here, that's where that red circle is where her body is, and she has a coat hanger around her neck. That is what the press, the news media talks about, is this coat hanger around her neck. And what happens next is that Norris is talking to his buddies, his old buddies in prison, and explains to them how they're killing these young girls, and they're using coat hangers around their necks. Well, one of the fellows they're talking to and telling this story on, he remembers reading in the newspaper about a young woman's body being found with a coat hanger around her neck. So he goes to the police and tells them that. And so now they have the name of Norris, and they do a surveillance, and they find that he's associated with Lawrence Bittaker, and they follow around, and they see what they're doing, and they're able to make a case. Now Norris, for whatever reason, he confesses and explains everything that happens, and they talk to him. He says, yeah, I'll take you where it is. It's up in the Glendora Mountains. And they go with the sheriff's detectives up there, and he points to the areas where they dumped the bodies. And they had a CSI team looking, and they found bones. Exactly where he says they dumped the bodies, they found bones. Now the bodies had been picked apart by the animals up there, the coyotes and all. So they had a few bones, and that was basically all they had left. Now, I put this together to give you an idea of how many young girls were involved, how many were killed. Undoubtedly, really many more that we never found, but these are the ones we prosecuted. Now, I'm getting to the point of our podcast, and is what do we do with this type of murderer? We have Bittaker, who lives for a long time, and we have Norris, who confesses. We go for the death penalty against Bittaker, and he gets the death penalty. And the question is, to you, is the death penalty appropriate? In Bittaker's case, killed a lot of people. It was very brutal, and he tortured these young women. They were very vulnerable. Now, some of you are going to say, well, he could be rehabilitated. And especially when he got elderly. His case went up on appeal many, many times. But the court kept putting, well, we have some doubts about it. We don't know for certain whether the death penalty is appropriate in this case. Some people could say, well, he was in such poor health, they could have released him. So that is the Bittaker case. And I want to do another one that's similar, and it's the Douglas Clark case. And he is the Sunset Strip slayer. what he liked to do is drive around the Sunset Strip, Hollywood, and look for prostitutes. He had his attitude of prostitutes is that they're trash and they don't deserve to be alive. And he would pick them up and then, agree to do sex with them. He lived with a partner, Carol Bundy, and this is their apartment. This is where they lived. So I just want to, it's kind of a normal existence, but it's kind of a strange. He has a sexual relationship with Carol Bundy, but he still liked to go out and pick up prostitutes. Here in April 1980, he picks up this Charlene, and he requests oral sex. They agree. They go to an isolated area. She's performing the act, and he starts stabbing her in the back, stabbing her. And she grabs and jumps back, and she puts her hand up to grab the knife. She grabs the knife, and it slips, and it cuts the tendons in her hand, and she starts bleeding profusely. And she opens the door with her other hand and runs out and gets away. Now Clark is surprised. He sets him back, and he drives away, and she goes to the police, and she's saved. However, the next one was not as lucky, and that was a marionette. Now we're in June. Same thing. He comes up, asks her for oral sex. She agrees, gets in the car. They go to an isolated area. She is performing it, and then he takes out his gun and shoots her in the back of the head. And then just throws her body along the side of the road. So that's what happened to her. And then later in June, these two sisters, they were prostitutes working the area. And Cynthia agrees to do oral sex. And she's in the front seat doing it. Now Gina's in the back seat. And, she's just sitting back there. And Clark says just for her to be quiet, sit there. And, he's having oral sex. And all of a sudden, Gina leans over the seat and looks down. This perturbs Clark. He turns around with his gun and shoots Gina. And then, as Cynthia's continuing to do oral sex, and he shoots the back of the head of Cynthia. So both of them have been shot. Then he drives over to a garage that he has. This is the garage. He takes both of them. He drags Cynthia in there. Now, Cynthia is definitely dead. And then he has sex on the corpse of Cynthia. When he's finished with that, he has sex with Gina. Now, the question is whether she was still alive. She eventually dies. But then he takes their address book, and he calls up their friends and tells them, what he's done to the two of them. This continues on, and Carol Bundy gets involved in it in several instances, goes with her, boyfriend, Douglas Clark, and they pick up prostitutes. Now, Carol sits in the back seat, and the prostitute's in the front seat, performing oral sex, and the idea is Carol's supposed to shoot the prostitute in the back of the head. In this one case, the lady her name was Kathy, and she didn't shoot her fast enough, and Clark grabs his gun out and shoots her in the back of the head, this Kathy. And they take her out and dumps her body off of Foothill Boulevard next to a water tower, and her body isn't found for a long time. It's decomposed, and it was never able to prove who that person was. We never learned it. Now, we go on in June, and Exie Wilson is our next victim, and Douglas is now out in the San Fernando Valley looking for a prostitute on Ventura Boulevard, picks her up, oral sex, goes to an isolated area. She's performing it, and then he takes his gun out, but he doesn't shoot her. While she's performing oral sex, he notices that she has dentures, and he's appalled at the fact that a prostitute would have dentures performing oral sex. So he takes that gun and he shoots her. right in the back of the head. Then when he gets out, he goes to the back of his car, gets a knife, and cuts her head off. Takes her head, puts it in the back seat, and he strips her off all clothes, takes her nude body, puts it next to the trash container, and then he gets back in the car. And he remembers there was another prostitute with Exie, and he's afraid that she will go to the police when Exie doesn't show up and might be able to identify him. So he looks for this Karen, finds her, gets her into the car, and they go to an isolated area. And as soon as they get there, before any sex whatsoever, he shoots her in the head, kills her. So he goes home with Exie's head. He gets there, and Carol Bundy, his girlfriend, comes out, and they take the head in, and she gets some lipstick, some rouge. They put makeup on this dead head. Then they put it in the freezer. And this is the box. This is the box that they stored that head in. So this went on for a while. They stored it in the freezer. And when he wanted to have oral sex, he would take the head out and use the head for oral sex. So that was what he was doing. And I put this together so you have some idea of how many people were involved in the Sunset Slayer case involving Clark. Now, how does it all come to an end? Well, in a very strange way. Carol Bundy she admired this Jack Murphy. He was a country western singer at a bar out in the San Fernando Valley. And she talked to him, and at one time she said, the real killer, the Sunset Slayer, is my boyfriend, Douglas Clark. And she didn't think much of it. And later on she realized, what happens if, Jack Murray went to the police and said that? So then she realized she had to kill Jack Murray, who she admired as a singer. She agrees to have sex with him in the back of his van. And while she's having sex, she takes her gun out and shoots Jack. And he dies. And his body is left in that van. So that is the unraveling of the Douglas Clark case. Nothing could be made right at the beginning. However, they hear about that he had these 2 guns. But where are they stored? They found them hidden where he worked. And when they found the guns, they matched up with a number of those prostitutes who were shot in the head. So it gets us to the point of what should be the sentence in Douglas Clark's case. He killed a number of prostitutes, young women. The reason, it was a sexual reason for him. He would have sex with the dead bodies. Very, very unusual. Now, some of you could say, well, maybe he could be rehabilitated. He could change his ways. And then at the end, he was elderly. His case went up on appeal so many times, and he's almost blind. So he could be released. It's highly unlikely that he could do any more killings. So let me just finish with this. You find all these optimistic dreamers, and this was one I found on the internet. It was so telling of how people think. Every individual is more than the crimes they commit. Considering that all human beings are capable of change, everyone should have the opportunity to improve themselves rather than having their life end early by the death penalty. Well, yeah, you can have that philosophy, and there's many of the, as we call them, bleeding heart liberals, who would say, yeah, we've got to focus on the killer. They're harm merchandise. That's why they committed the crime. But we've got to find other ways of doing it. Now, in California, basically, we have taken the death penalty off the table. We're not enforcing it. It's still on the books. And it most likely will fade away in time. So we are stuck with 2, life without the possibility of parole and life with parole. Now remember, these people, these murderers, in many cases, they're in their 20s or 30s. They're going to be alive for another 50 years. What are we going to do with these people? And we used to say, that was fine. Life without possibility of parole, we'll just lock them up and throw away the key. Well, that isn't working out any longer because the courts on appeals are throwing out life without parole. They say that isn't fair. The governor is trying, and the parole board is kicking them out. And the legislature is trying to find ways of doing away with life without possibility of parole. So that is eroding. So we may not have that as an option any further. Anyway, I want to get to the end of this podcast, and I want to say, can't we come up with something better? As far as there are despicable people. And can't you agree that the Billy Bradfords, the Lawrence Whitakers, and the Douglas Clarks are vile, horrific, evil people? They're the worst of the worst. Can't we find a way of taking care of these people? If we're not going to execute them, and if we're not going to have life without the possibility of parole, can't we find a place where we can, I can't say the word warehouse them, put them out in the desert, put them in a humane setting, but maybe just the bare basics to keep them alive, not tortured, not solitary confinement, but where they can live their life, but in a humane way, but not in a, what we would say, a limousine prison life. Anyway, some of you might be interested in my book. I wrote the book, The Death of the Death Penalty, now closed. And if you really want more information on it, you can get my book on Amazon. It just tells you that we need to come up with a better way of handling these despicable murderers. So anyway, if you're interested, take a look at it. Well, hopefully you will join us again for another True Crime Files of Los Angeles Inside Story, when we discuss another one of the criminal justice issues. See you then.